Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube page, and this is session number 31.
Yes.
And we haven't called each other heretics yet. We haven't sent out any letters disbarring fellowship from each other. We remain friends.
Yes.
That's hard for two preachers, isn't it? To go through
it is
30 plus sessions talking about the Bible without branding each other as having committed apostasy.
It's when you get off the Bibles when you start fighting.
So today is June the 9th, 2021. And this is session number 31. And Mike Maney is my compatriot up there in Missoula, Montana. And both of us, for June the 9th, especially here in Modesto, California, we're going through a cooling trend. It won't get out of the 70s today, which for almost the middle of June, that is just unheard of. And the wind is blowing, and it's cool, it's refreshing. We love it. Our doors are open, our windows are open. But I looked at the forecast, and next Wednesday is going to be 99. So we're going to return to our normal weather pattern. But for a few days, we're really enjoying this.
Yeah.
And I guess this must be the whole West Coast, because you're going through a little bit of a cool down, aren't you? With all the storm and rain. And
we're
you said
57.
you're 57. Wow.
Yeah.
You're having some rain today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it must be kind of a general little storm front moving through the whole West Coast into your neck of the woods. And you said your rivers are like overflowing and our rivers are just dry, and we're in a drought. And everybody's wondering how we're going to make it through a summer and hope it's not too hot so we can not lose all of our crops and plants and everything. So that's life in the West.
It is life in the West. Yes. Yes, it is.
Go west, young man, they said.
Yes, right.
Now what's happening in California is everyone saying go east.
Yes.
Some as far as Arizona and Nevada, and some as far east as Missoula, Montana. And
or Texas. Yeah,
a lot in Texas, but a lot of moving to like Tennessee, Kentucky. Not all the way to the East Coast, but a lot of Californians have their roots in the South, from the Depression, and from the Dust Bowl and all that. And so a couple of generations have lived out here, and they still had their history and maybe some relatives left back there and everything. I know my dad was born in Tennessee, raised in Arkansas. My mom's born and raised in Oklahoma. And so we would go back there and visit relatives. And I just thought, especially Tennessee, I just thought that was a beautiful state. And I could see living back there, in some lake in a nice cabin, and sell my little old 30-year-old tract home in California and have enough equity money to move back there, and nice cabin on a lake and a nice vehicle and money in the bank and no worries. That's kind of how a lot of people are thinking right now.
Brand new tractor.
Shotgun and a rifle and a 35.
And a good hunting dog. Well, we're going to travel really far east today, aren't we? The Middle East.
We're going to go all the way to the Middle East. And we just kind of introduced Exodus last week. Of course, all these lessons, 30 sessions so far, we're talking about Christ in the Old Testament. We're going back to the beginning, looking for types and shadows and examples and principles and everything that speak about Christ from Genesis 1:1 forward. And we made it through Genesis. We're introducing Exodus, and the whole story we're involved in is about Israel. And of course, Israel, we say it means Prince of God, but really deeper than that, or underneath that, it carries the idea of struggling with God, from the story of Jacob wrestling with God all night, the angel. And so we carry it that step further to the idea of that we wrestle with God, and then we come out the other side as an overcomer, because the name Israel, it implies wrestling or struggling with God, but it also goes on to the idea of victory. Not so much that we're victorious over God, but that by His grace we're able to come through the struggle and come out the other side better. We may limp the rest of our life like Jacob did.
Yeah.
But I think even he recognized that whatever pain and limp and disability that caused him the rest of his life, he came out the other side a better man.
Yes.
A better man.
Yeah.
And so God changed his name to Israel. You have wrestled with God and man and have prevailed.
Yeah.
So Israel is kind of the Old Testament word for the New Testament overcomer. And so we like the idea of overcomer in the New Testament. We look at Revelation 2 and 3, the promises to the overcomer. He overcomes shall inherit all things. I will be their God, and they shall be my son, which is the essence of a victorious covenant relationship. And so we like the idea of the victory part, but we tend to kind of downplay, what does it mean to become an overcomer?
Yeah.
Well, it means you've gone through a great struggle. And sometimes the struggle takes you to the depths of despair, of pain, of heartache, of loss, of all sorts of very difficult things. But hopefully you come out the other side better, and then you can say, I'm an overcomer by the grace of God. But what did I overcome? Well, I overcame a great trial, a great time of tribulation, a great maybe loss of relationships, certainly a loss of my former self, which is what the Christian life is all about: taking up your cross, denying yourself, crucifying the flesh, putting the old person behind you, being renewed day by day, letting the Holy Spirit transform us into the image of Christ from glory to glory. So, bits at a time. And just all those analogies or scriptures are simply saying that there's a long and tough struggle involved before you can truly overcome. So we like to stress the victory part, but the victory it only comes after a time of struggle.
You know what I like in that story, what stands out to me, Brother Rick, in that wrestling match was, I think the angel said, let go. And he said, I'm not going to let go of you until you give me a blessing.
Yeah.
And so that's the overcomer. I'm not letting go because I realize there's a blessing. I'm holding on to a blessing, and I don't want to let go of it.
Yeah.
And so he persists and keep wrestling until you get that blessing. And so I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why his name could be changed from, he was holding on, let me put it this way, because I never thought about it quite this way. You triggered it. He was a holder on his whole life. But as Jacob, he was the heel catcher, wasn't he? He started out holding on to Esau, and he held on to what Esau rightfully had as firstborn, and he held on until he obtained what he was holding on to of Esau's. And then he wouldn't let go of the angel until the angel would bless him. So this whole idea of his life holding on, and maybe that's something to develop in our thinking is, what are you holding on to? Paul said, I have been, what's the word in our Bibles? But it means to be arrested in Philippians.
Oh, apprehended.
Apprehended.
Yes,
For that which I have been apprehended to. But the idea is being arrested. The Lord has arrested me for the purpose that he arrested me to. And I strive for the upward calling of God in Christ until I receive that prize. So that's just Paul's way saying the same thing Jacob said. I'm going to hold on until you bless me.
And he told Timothy to hold on to eternal life. That was
lay hold of eternal life.
Hold on.
Lay hold and hold on.
Yeah.
And don't let go.
Don't let go.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to realize the value. You have to realize the value of it first. If you don't see the value, then something can come along that's pretty cheap, and it'll divert your attention or your focus, and you'll go that direction. So you have to realize the value.
And that's why God allowed Jacob to go through that whole process, even though a lot of it was in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
But at least Jacob had a sense of the value of it and desired it.
Yeah.
And may have not always gone about it in the most godly or spiritual or humble faith way.
Yeah.
But he had a much deeper desire for it than Esau did.
Yeah.
And Esau was willing to give it up lightly.
Yeah.
And Jacob wanted it. And so Jacob grabbed hold of it as Jacob and would not let go.
Yeah.
And he grabbed hold of that angel and wouldn't let go.
Mm-hmm.
And because of it, his name was changed to Prince of God, Overcomer.
Yeah.
And so what Paul is saying in Philippians 3, and then what you said, what he's telling Timothy, is simply just bringing that Jacob story over into the New Testament language.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, one of our purposes all through these lessons is to show the unity of the Bible, that there's themes all the way through.
Yeah.
And so just by comparing Genesis 32 and that all-night wrestling match to Philippians 3 and apprehending that for which I've been apprehended too is just it's just a Bible way of repeating the same theme and just in a different way.
I think you mentioned he was a heel catcher. Wasn't it Paul that said in Romans that there was two nations were wrestling inside her womb?
Wrestling. Yeah, they said he was wrestling even before he was born, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he wrestled his whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that all-night wrestling was kind of what set him free.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, he didn't wrestle too much.
Mm-hmm.
He had grief, certainly about the supposed death of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And he had sorrow along the way. But as far as him and God was concerned, it seems like that wrestling match ended that. Mm-hmm. And when God knew that his heart was changed, changed his name officially to Israel, it seemed like the rest of his life was more in peace with God and not trying to scheme and plot and wrestle and make everything so difficult. Mm-hmm. He was much more willing to see God's hand in everything and accept the will of God in his life.
He limped the rest of his life, right? He had some kind of a limp, some notable scar as a result of that. And Paul said that he bore in his body the marks of Christ, for what it cost for him to serve. Jesus, of course, had the nail prints to memorialize his conflict, his struggle, in going to the cross. So I think there needs to be some marks in our life too. Maybe not in a physical sense, but some marks that we are on that path that we're willing to overcome in this struggle. Some type of marks or measurement, growth.
Yeah, it's another great tie-in, Mike, to an Old Testament story and New Testament example of Jacob having that in his flesh the rest of his life, partly as a reminder and partly to keep him humble, because that limp and the pain associated with that limp would be a constant reminder. I have this because I tried to live in my own strength.
Yes.
And now much of my own strength is gone. And now I have to depend on the strength of God. And that's exactly what Paul was talking about. He wanted the Lord to take away that thorn in the flesh. And I'm sure he just prayed fervently with tears and everything about it.
Yeah.
But then he said, because of the abundance of the revelations that God had given me. So even the great apostle Paul was in danger of human pride, arrogance and boasting. Yeah. And so he said, because of the abundance of the revelations that were given me, God decided to leave this thorn in the flesh as a way to keep me humble.
It was his limp
Yeah, it was his limp. And we don't normally think that Paul would need that,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
every human needs that.
Yeah. I
Because
think
we're all prone to pride.
I think what maybe pushed Paul's button as far as pride were probably his old contemporaries, the old Pharisees. They seemed to get under his skin because he knew the game, he knew the pride, he knew what they were thinking and how they felt. And if anyone could push his button, it would be those guys. And so without some type of maybe humility factor, he might have lost it over those guys in a sense of pride.
That's another good point. So maybe in two ways. So the one you mentioned, he'd get in the flesh with not just anger, but discouragement, frustration.
Yeah.
Because he was steeped in it more than they all.
Yes.
He was converted from it.
Yeah.
And the frustration of, why do they keep rejecting what is so clear to me now?
Mm-hmm.
And why are they opposing me everywhere I go? They're sending people from city to city. They're making sure I get beat up and stoned and thrown in prison. And they, not only that, they are putting pressure on Jewish believers to convert back to Judaism. Mm-hmm. They are threatening Jews to not believe the gospel. They're doing everything they can to oppose me, and yet it's so clear to me. So that on that side, like you brought up, is one part of it. But then the other side is kind of what we, I think we talked about Solomon maybe. Mm-hmm. I've described Solomon as the first half of his reign was a type of Christ, and the second half of his reign was a type of the Antichrist. Something happened with the visitation of the Queen of Sheba, and then it says in that same chapter that then all those of the nations surrounding would ask for an audience of Solomon, and they paid him tribute of 666 talents of gold every year. Mm-hmm. So a mark of the beast system was set up, an accounting system, a payment for the right to have an audience with Solomon, everybody coming to listen to him, to brag on him, to see his greatness. And so in the process of all that, not just all the wives and concubines turning his heart to idol gods, but him believing all the praise, I think is part of his downfall. His pride entered in and began to believe all of the accolades. And that's the other part with Paul is he had a lot of detractors, a lot of enemies, a lot of opposers. Mm-hmm. But he also, I'm sure, had a lot of people who thought he was the next thing to God. Mm. And like you said, because of the abundance of the revelations, like Peter said, he says many things hard to understand. I think there was a group surrounding Paul that treated him as if almost he was a god. Mm-hmm. And so that part of his pride had to be cut down to size some too. Yeah. So in both ways, yes. In both ways, he, that thorn in the flesh served to tamp down his pride in both ways. Mm-hmm.
I like what you're talking about, Solomon and the nations. So the pay for privilege, is this a new idea? Huh?
No. What we've seen in our country is not a new idea.
It's not a new idea.
And we think it's new. And that's the history of the human race.
Yes, pay to play. Yes.
Pay to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quid pro quo has always been. You scratch my back, I'll scratch you. I mean, there's a reason why politicians are elected on a $100,000 a year salary, and in 10 years they are multimillionaires.
Yes.
They're scratching people's backs, and other people are throwing millions of dollars their way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
it's just the nature of the human race.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to this idea of of the struggle Jacob changed to Israel. The reason I brought that up is because the book of Exodus opens now with his descendants in a time of struggle.
Yeah.
And they need to be wrestling with God, and they need to be delivered, and they need to be turned from Jacob to Israel. They need to be turned from what they are to what God wants them to be, and become overcomers. And it really brings up a really important principle. Maybe now would be the time to bring it up. Is you have Jacob as the father of Israel, of course back to Abraham, but Jacob directly. And then you have the nation that came from him. And this principle in the Bible of the individual experience and then the corporate experience, we brought up before.
Yes.
And so we see it here in the opening chapters of Exodus, that Israel is struggling, wrestling, because in their case, even more so than Jacob, I mean, Jacob caused a lot of his own problems, but in the case of Israel, what did they do to cause this? I mean, the Bible doesn't bring up any great sins, any great acts of rebellion. God told Jacob to come down there with his family. Joseph made sure they were blessed. Everything was going along to Joseph's through Joseph's grandchildren. They were prosperous. They were free. They were safe. And then this Pharaoh rises up who did not know Joseph and turned them into slaves, not because of anything that they had necessarily done, just because they were there. And my point is, was there an attitude within those slave generation or two of Jews, of Israelites, that were questioning God? Why have you allowed this? You know, that old, one of the oldest questions, you know, why, if there is a God, why does he allow suffering? If Yahweh is our God, as we believe he is, if he gave our fathers promises, and promises imply blessings, promises imply protection, provision, safety. It's a covenant relationship. So why are we being afflicted? Why are we struggling? Why are we wrestling? Why are we being whipped and beaten? And we haven't done anything to deserve this. And why is God allowing it to happen? So I don't think we're reading between the lines in the first chapter of Exodus of this kind of attitude probably having developed within the Israelites in Egypt. Because there was no prophet coming to them saying, this is the reason. You're being punished, you know, like the later prophets in their history. But God didn't send a prophet because there was nothing to tell as far as pointing to a particular sin or rebellion. So it would just raise a question in their mind of why is God allowing this? And part of it is this whole principle of the corporate son experiencing what the individual son, in this case, what Jacob, the process he had to go through, God was wanting the people to go through. And then experience God's deliverance and salvation on the other side.
To make the same decision as Jacob and to want to hold on to that valuable.
And so that's why throughout the plagues, there's a few times God told Moses, said that I'm not just doing this so that the Egyptians might know who the true God is. I'm doing this so that your people might know who God is. So he had a purpose through all this. Doesn't make it any easier if you're the generation who is born, lives, and dies as a slave.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, we see that what God knew was the influence had already, the Egyptian paganism had already begun to influence them, as we noticed in the wilderness. They reverted to the calf, and so God probably already saw a breakdown.
Yes.
In His people.
Yeah, and you know, human nature being what it is, part of it was maybe just simply idolatry, but part of it might have been maybe if we act like we believe in their gods, they won't be so harsh toward us.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be part of human nature.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. That attitude was being developed, that they needed to be delivered from through this series of plagues and through their own struggles. And then when God showed them His great salvation, then they would understand that their God is the only true God. But this idea of the corporate son and then the personal son is a real important principle in the Bible.
Yes, it is.
So we can start with Jacob and then apply it to the nation. So the personal and then the corporate, or then we could take it the next step, the corporate and then back to the personal son, Jesus.
Yeah.
So you have a verse like Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt I have called my son. Well, that's what we're getting ready to study in Exodus.
Yeah.
The corporate son. But yet, when Joseph and Mary had to flee to Egypt, when Herod was killing the baby boys, and when they came back to their own land, Matthew 2:15, I think it is, quotes Hosea 11:1, that it might be fulfilled, out of Egypt I have called my son. So God has the personal son experience what the corporate son experienced.
Yeah.
And He also had the personal son experience to a larger degree, but in kind of the same sense, the personal son had to experience their suffering.
Yeah.
And being afflicted by Egypt, the type of the world.
Yeah.
And even unto death. There's a verse in Isaiah, verses 7 through 9 is the whole passage, but one of the statements in that passage says, in their affliction, He was afflicted. And this connection to Christ with His people. We're talking about Israel, but same principle applies now to the church. And so He suffered, and in John 15 and 16 and so forth, the servant is not above his master. If they hated me, they'll hate you. If I suffer, you have to suffer. And so the experience of the corporate son, the church, after Christ, has been largely the experience of Christ. And we are the anomaly. We are the exception in America.
Yeah.
But in most of our history, as our Anabaptist forefathers, and in large parts of the world still today, the normative Christian life is a suffering experience.
Yeah. When we get to the New Testament, and Jesus asked Saul, why are you persecuting me? Well, He was persecuting the Son, wasn't He?
Yeah, Jesus wasn't there in person.
Right.
But Jesus took it personal.
Yeah.
You know, like Paul said to the Corinthians, if you offend one of these younger ones, you sin against Christ.
Yes.
This idea of, or even in that famous judgment of the sheep and the goat.
Yes. Yeah.
You did it to the least of these, my brethren, or did not do it either way.
Yeah.
You did it to me.
It's the law of association.
That captures this whole principle of the corporate son and the personal son, and the relationship between the two, experiencing the same things.
Yeah.
And so these themes in Exodus, they're about the corporate son, but they're also about the personal son, who will come 1,500 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just like that thought. I just thought that fit in right here. We're talking about Jacob.
Well, they bore Yahweh's name you put his name in them. And like any family name, you want every individual of the family to uphold the honor and the integrity of that last name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not every family member will, but the idea is that we all have one last name, and all of us are obligated to honor that last name with through your individual character.
Yeah, so we like to use the term Christian. We say it means to be like Christ.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what does it mean to really be like Christ?
Yeah.
Are you willing to be like Christ in his suffering and his death?
Yeah.
Are you willing to be like Christ in his rejection,
Yeah.
in the hatred toward him?
Right.
So we normally leave off that part. We like
Yeah.
the power and the glory and all that part. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we like the resurrection part, but not the cross part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we look here in the opening chapter of Exodus, and it names the sons of Jacob, and they went down there as 70 persons, and they came out. What do you use the figure about 2.5 million that came out?
That's what I've always heard that. And I don't have any other information to contradict that.
So, well, we know they had 600,000 men of fighting age.
Yeah.
So we extrapolate from that, their wives and their kids and people too old and so forth. And we come up with about 2.5 million. I think that's a pretty good guess. I saw something the other day that really struck me. Depending on how close we think we are to the tribulation time and the return of Christ. But Zechariah 13 speaks about 1/3 will be brought through, 2/3 will die.
Mm-hmm.
I read a population stat the other day that currently in Israel, there are approximately 7.5 million Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So what's 1/3 of that? 2.5 million. So if you think the tribulation time is real close and only 1/3 survive, the 1/3 that survives is the same number as those who came out of Egypt. That just kind of struck me as just an interesting little side note that adds this little, thing that you can't quite prove, but it just adds weight to the inspiration of the Bible.
And you just gave me goosebumps. Because I never thought of that.
Well, I mean, just a light bulb goes off when you just think of something like that. It is the same number that comes out of the tribulation, the same number that came out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Through their greater Moses, Jesus, through their greater David, through their greater Joshua, the same name.
Yeah.
Well,
we saw I think we talked about when we were in Genesis, the 3,000 that were slain as the word of God was being delivered. Moses, Sinai, and all that. 3,000 were saved on Pentecost, the counterpart. And so God likes to play with numbers.
Yes, he does. So they're experiencing suffering. So what we find from the end of Genesis is, we keep bringing up this theme of Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, their continual battle. At the end of Genesis, it looked like the seed of the woman was kind of in control. Joseph, they had safety, protection, prosperity. And yet we come to the first chapter of Exodus, suddenly the seed of the serpent seems to be winning. And Pharaoh was trying to work it out to where the seed of the serpent gained a total victory. Kill all the male babies, marry the female babies off to the Egyptian men, and then Israel will lose their total identity. The people of God would be wiped out. So, and that was his plan. I mean, I don't know if he thought of it quite completely like that, but that would have been the end result if it kept up. And so the seed of the woman would have died out. But what we have mentioned several times is that God's divine institutions, the home, the nation of Israel, and the church, are all three perpetual.
Mm-hmm.
We love to talk about the perpetuity of the church, the perpetuity of marriage and family and the home, and the perpetuity of Israel were already in place and guaranteed before Matthew 16:18 to the church.
Yeah.
And when Christ comes back, all three, now they may be beaten down and almost overcome. In fact, the Bible says that the saints will be given over into his hand. He'll overcome them, or at least in the process of overcoming them.
Yeah.
So it will appear, Jesus said, when the Son of Man returns to earth, will he find faith? Mm-hmm. So it's going to be in desperate condition, but when he comes back, all three will have survived, because when God creates a divine institution, he guarantees its perpetuity. Yeah. And I like that thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we find things went from very good to very bad. Mm-hmm. And it all turns on this verse 8, chapter 1. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. This book I was mentioning last week, I got it and I've been flipping through it. It's called the Chronology of the Old Testament. And
I downloaded the PDF.
Dr. Floyd Nolan Jones.
Uh-huh.
And, just thumbing through it, it's almost overwhelming to look at a book like this, because you think this would take a brilliant man 10 lifetimes to be able to research and to put together all this material in such great detail. But he has lots of charts and graphs and scriptures and everything to just kind of show his views of correct Bible chronology. Uh-huh. And he's the one that, I forget what I said last week, but he's the one that claims there's only about less than 100 years, maybe 63 or some 83 or something like that, years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses. Mm. And, God did tell Abraham 4 generations, covering 400 years or so. But, we take that 430 years from the time Abraham entered Canaan, 400 years from the time Isaac was weaned. Mm-hmm. And Galatians 3 tells us that the 430 years from the time of the promise, the call of Abraham, to the giving of the law. Mm-hmm. So from that, we calculate that that Jacob came down into Egypt with his sons to the time of Moses, and the deliverance was about half of that time. Yeah, about half of that time. Uh-huh. Yeah, and then only a part of half of that time was actually in servitude. Mm-hmm. And as we said, it doesn't make it any easier for the person who had to live all through it. Right. But it wasn't the entire 400 to 430 years. Mm-hmm. And so, but taking that, that means about half of the time Abraham entered the land until the time Joshua brought them back into the land. At least half of that time, maybe a little over, they were out of the land. Mm-hmm. So, you just look back there at the original promise, right? And you wouldn't think almost 500 years later, they were out of the land over half of that time. Mm-hmm. But just the way God works out His promises, the way events happen, and getting involved with human nature and men's free will and choices and sins, and God's dealing with that and all that. So the way the promise works out is much different than what you would have thought when He first gave it to Abraham.
Well, you mentioned the end times, little bit ago. And if he's got an overall template in mind, a model of roughly 6 days, 6,000 years, then the segments of time within that the main amount of time is going to vary, so that means he'll have to have his people in Egypt for so long, in Canaan for so long, out of Canaan for so long, back in Canaan for so long, to the whole thing, until when it all shakes out, he's ready. He's ready to return, ready to pull the trigger, because it's all played out as he had directed it on his time scale. That fits into the 6 days or the 6,000 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they get back in the land, and then they eventually go off into Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity, and only a portion of them return.
Yeah.
Zechariah calls it the day of small things. So it was not the fulfillment of all those promises of their great return to their land permanently.
Yeah.
Then 70 AD, and then the Bar Kokhba revolt about 60 years after that, where they were scattered, their cities destroyed and everything. And then for about 2,000 years, scattered throughout the earth. And then in 1948, officially becoming a nation.
Yeah.
But yet even that's not the fulfillment, because it's needs to be yet in their belief. So that's why the later prophets all spoke about a time when Israel would be in their land, never to be removed again, never to go into exile, never for the Gentiles to rule over them, never to be cast out by God. So part of the purpose of the 1,000 years is to show that when God promised it to Abraham, his purpose was for them to be in their promised land permanently, serving their Messiah. And that's a large part of what the millennial will be there to prove. Yeah. And it will prove it.
Yeah. And within that 6,000 years, there will be ample evidence for all the other nations to figure out that this little nation that was promised existence just didn't go away, because God's hand was over that nation. Ample proof that someone's looking out for them as promised.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, what they don't know is they're going to have one more wilderness experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what Revelation 12 talks about.
Yeah.
And so they think they're safe and prosperous right now, and they're entering into covenants with some of the surrounding, more friendly Arabic Muslim nations. It's going to bring them into a false sense of safety, and the man of sin is going to undo all that eventually. But they don't. It's not even in their thinking of another form of exile into the wilderness and a return with their Messiah. That's so foreign. Yeah. But that's that's the message that somehow we need to develop better and clearer. Yeah. Because if I understand the Bible correctly, we're going to be here during that time, witnessing to them of this very thing, helping them through it. The Bible uses the word nourishing them, and preaching the truth to them, sharing the gospel to them, letting them know that the series of events that they should expect to happen. And when Jesus and Paul and the apostles in the book of Acts talked about to the Jew first, also to the Greek, we lost a lot of that. The institutional church, and by that I mean the non-divine institutional church, that was developed into the state church throughout the Middle and Dark Ages. they became so anti-Semitic, did not think the Jews were even worthy of sharing the gospel with.
Mhm.
And I think the Anabaptists probably continued the idea of there's something about Israel that God still has a purpose with, that we need to be witnessing to them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think part of it was the shared persecution and suffering.
Yeah.
That it was usually the Anabaptist and the Jew side by side that were being persecuted.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I you know, the Anabaptists don't have a lot of recorded history, but I'd like to think that they were continuing their witness to the Jew first and also to the Greek.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's going to return much to that during the tribulation, that God's going to lay on the heart of his people a more focused effort
Mhm.
for the salvation of Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's interesting too is we're seeing the government take on some changes over there. Yet, will probably be out. Well, he will be out. So it's just that's another marker, I think, that there's going to be a major change over there at this particular time in history. You know.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of headlines this week. I haven't really read a lot of them, but kind of noticed the headlines of both religious and non-religious people raising the same question.
Mhm.
What is the future for Israel if Bibi is out of the way?
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, Bible type people will try to put it within Bible prophecy to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be some sort of shared rule by both parties, which is kind of odd.
Yeah, it is odd.
So will they try to accommodate Israel's enemies, seeking some sort of peace treaties, or will it?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we have an administration right now that's more antagonistic against Israel.
Yeah.
There are bills being proposed. They probably don't have much chance of passage, but just the fact that this mindset is in our Congress, there are bills being proposed that all aid to Israel be cut off because of how they treated the Palestinians in this latest little skirmish. And looking at it so backwards to how obvious it is that Israel is just defending themselves against attack. And yet they want all aid to Israel. And we have an administration right now that maybe they won't quite go along with it, but they're more open to it than other administrations have been.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I keep reading these articles, and a lot of them are from politically leftist Jews, of which there are many, of course.
Yeah.
But raising the alarm of the rising anti-Semitism throughout the Western world.
Yeah.
And everyone thought it died out with the Holocaust, but it's really making a resurgence, and this almost built-in inner hatred toward God's nerve to choose these people. How dare he? And how that we're going to do all we can to rage against God's election. That's Psalm 2 right there.
Yeah.
And it's going to result in the time of Jacob's trouble.
Yeah.
That's what it's headed to.
Yeah.
And they don't, a lot of them don't realize it. We see it kind of heading that way. And we see an administration being elected that is just not sympathetic toward Israel. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
the never again slogan is just, it's going to be again.
It will be again. Yes,
it will be again. Yeah.
But hopefully, and I think this is a part of the end times that I think we have neglected to a large degree, is because we look at Israel as well. They're in unbelief. They've rejected their Messiah. They kind of deserve the tribulation that they're going to go through, and God's going to use it for their salvation. And so we kind of go down that road. But what about the road of what does God need to do to the church to prepare us to be used by him during the tribulation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does the church need to be refined?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when Peter says judgment must begin at the house of God,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
what does that mean? You know, what does it mean to be, when Paul says in Ephesians 5 that he might present it to him without spot and without wrinkle? How is God going to remove the spots and wrinkles from the church? And how dare us take a view that, well, the true church really doesn't have any spots or wrinkles? Well, I think we have a whole lot of spots and wrinkles.
You think?
that God's going to do whatever he's going to do to prepare us to be an end time people, as a witness to the nations, as a witness to Israel on the run,
Mm-hmm.
as a witness to the principalities and powers of the air. It's going to cost us our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cause us great suffering, but I call it the church's finest hour.
Yeah.
But what must God do to prepare the church for that time? You know, what did he need to do to Saul of Tarsus to prepare him to be used?
Mm-hmm.
He told Ananias to tell him, I'm going to show him what great things he must suffer for my name's sake.
Yeah.
That was part of his preparation.
That was.
And that we haven't,
Yeah.
I don't think we just tend to think, well, if we go through the tribulation, we're just going to have to really ask God for grace and faith to endure the persecution.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about that from the standpoint of what the Antichrist is going to do against us, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But what about the standpoint of what God needs to do against us that's really for us to get us prepared for that time?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just think there's more we need to give thought at that too.
I can hear Saul of Tarsus now. What do you mean tribulation? I thought I was coming over to the good side. You know?
Well, and that's why he felt the need. I think he wrote it, but whoever wrote it, the book of Hebrews,
Mm-hmm.
because his fellow Jews thought that by becoming Christians, their life might become better than it was being Jews.
Yeah.
It became worse.
Yeah.
Because now they were mistreated by the Romans and by the Judaizers.
Yeah.
And many of them were going back to Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Paul wrote that impassioned plea called the book of Hebrews.
Yeah.
That having it, continually say, in spite of your present circumstances, what you have now is better than what you had.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Stressing that idea of better.
Yeah. So stop listening to your relatives.
Is that what you got out of that? Listening to your neighbors and friends and cousins.
But the struggles we're talking about, yet future, of course they have, really, you see to a large degree beginning right here in Exodus.
Yes.
The seed of it right here.
So this Pharaoh began to, he said in verse 10, come and, he said, look, the people of the children of Israel are more than and mightier than we. Come and let us deal wisely or shrewdly, deceitfully even.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, there's that spirit of Antichrist, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Daniel 7, Daniel 11,
Yeah.
2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 13, all talks about the deceitful speech and actions of the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let us deal shrewdly with them. So I'm sure there'll be a number of meetings that the Antichrist is sitting at the head of the conference table saying, how do we deal with these Christians?
Yeah.
In a way that they don't see it coming,
Mm-hmm.
And let's get the upper hand against them.
Yeah.
So they came up with a way to afflict them in verse 11 and put them to task to build some of their great, no doubt, pyramid type structures, their different buildings that the Egyptians loved to build in honor of their pharaohs. But it says in verse 12, the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew.
Yeah.
And this is such an interesting statement, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Back in verse 7, it said, the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Just this, I think I mentioned it last week, this creational theme. It's kind of like in Genesis 1 and 2, and then like right after the flood, be fruitful and multiply. It's like in the midst of tragedy almost. Mm-hmm. They are multiplying, and it's very, very creational kind of a theme. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, with harshness. So the treatment of Christ's people by the world, and which is, as I call, the normative for Christian experience that we haven't known much in America.
Right.
But, the early church, I was reading about one of the main practices that when the Caesars really began turning against the Christians. And instead of just wholesale slaughter, I'm thinking of this idea where Pharaoh said, let us deal shrewdly with them. The Caesars came along and said, well, we just don't want to wipe you out. In fact, we'll even let you practice your religion. All you have to do, the only requirement we make is that you come into the temple to the emperor and you pay a little bit of money to buy some incense to burn to the Caesar.
Yeah.
And then you can go on and practice your religion.
Yeah.
That's all we ask.
Yeah.
And to make it so easy
mm-hmm.
to serve both, or to show some allegiance to both. And many Christians ended up giving their lives, and the Romans could not understand it. Mm-hmm. All we're asking you to do is one little simple thing. Yeah. Just burn some incense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your life can be saved.
Yeah.
Now, no doubt, many Christians probably did that, salving their conscience by saying, well, for the greater good, I'm doing it to save my family, I'm doing it to save my children. Mm-hmm. Yeah. God knows my heart. Mm-hmm. God knows I don't really mean it. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm sure all those kind of justifications, because we can't say that every Christian stood firm and was willing to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
But many did give their lives over something as simple as not burning incense to Caesar.
Mm-hmm. Go back to your concept, your principle, the corporate versus the individual.
Yeah. So, just when the Antichrist deals shrewdly with God's people in the tribulation, will it at least start out by saying, I'll let you practice your religion? I mean, and that's what he's going to do to Israel, huh?
Yeah.
Part of this covenant is we'll let you practice your religion. Even on the Temple Mount, we'll let you practice your religion.
Yeah.
But you just have to go along with all the rest of this. And he's going to attempt this, because it'll work with Israel to a degree. It'll work for the purpose of peace, for the larger good.
Yeah.
And it'll last for 3.5 years. But he'll try the same thing, I think, with church saints. Mm-hmm. And maybe just that, we say it's the abomination of desolation. What particular act? We say the great falling away is already happening, great apostasy. But when Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 says the apostasy must come first, and the man of sin be revealed. Those two things are tied together as if they're kind of in the same close time period. And I wonder if it's something like this, where the Antichrist will try to find a compromise and say, you can practice your religion as long as you go along with all the other, try to find a way.
Yeah.
And that many so-called Christians, at least, will say, well, I think I can go. I think I can do that. And so that in one official act, maybe, the great separation will come. So I wonder, will the apostasy be gradual, or will it be like a sudden event? And it seems to be described as a sudden event.
Yeah. I think the gradual is there to make the choosing to fall away in the one sweeping event much easier.
Yes.
Because the attitudes, the weakening will have been taking place for then the final propositions made. Oh, okay. If it was just if you go from really strong to that proposition, they probably wouldn't accept it.
It's a big jump.
And I think some of the compromises that I'm seeing today, on the one hand, is a universal church in one form or another is creeping in, weakening our stand. Then there's those on the other far extreme, believe that they have to save themselves through their own works. Okay, there's that extreme. Also, both are wrong. They're just opposite ends. Then you have, of course, the world, entertainment, and just lulling us to sleep on that note. So people are not as diligent, maybe in reading and studying and praying. They're getting kind of, slowly the water's heating up all around them, and they don't realize it. So I think there's a different fronts, different spear tips that's going to break it down generally. But that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to try to encourage people to, hey, hold on to what's valuable, keep wrestling.
Yeah, and I think, like with here, I think so. It'll probably reach a place where the Antichrist will be able to say, well, I tried to compromise with you. I tried to find a way to where we wouldn't have to take stronger steps against you, but there's a group of you not willing to go along with it, so I'm going to lower the boom.
Yeah.
That's when the martyrdom starts happening.
Yes.
So this Pharaoh's solution is the usual solution of a tyrant dictator. So he's a type of the Antichrist. Is death. Just wipe him out.
Yeah.
So the male babies were ordered killed, and here's again this corporate son and the personal son. The male babies ordered all the male babies to be killed, and that's exactly what Herod did at the birth of Christ. Attempting to kill the personal son. He was willing to go after the corporate son to kill the personal son. And the Lord identifies with his people. He tried to do it by stealth at first. So here's this: let us deal with him shrewdly. So in verse 16, he tried to do it shrewdly, or by stealth, when he's talking to these two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. And I preached a sermon on them one time. What odd names in our ears, huh? But two of the most courageous women who ever lived. Just wonderful, just great women. And so it's a shrewd way of dealing with it. When you do the duties of a midwife in verse 16 for the Hebrew women, you see them on the birth stools. If it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, then he shall live. And the implication here is, you don't just like take that male baby out, show the mother what it is, and then twist its neck and kill it. But do it kind of secretly, like it died in childbirth. You don't make it too obvious what's going on. Of course, eventually it would have become obvious, but he was attempting to, like, as you said, do it in stages, kind of sneak up on them a little bit, to where they wouldn't catch on right away.
And I imagine sparing the daughters, then the Egyptians could take those daughters and break down the race.
So do away with the nation that way. Kill the boys and intermarry the women.
Because you're also getting rid of your future soldiers who would rise up against you, the men.
But because Shiphrah and Puah in verse 17, because they feared God.
Mm.
Now, I don't know how much study you've done into these two. And there's two opinions.
Mm-hmm.
It says in verse 15, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. Does this mean they were Hebrew and ethnic Hebrews acting as midwives, or were they midwives to the Hebrews? In other words, they were not Jewish blood.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And I've come to the conclusion they were not Jewish blood. Maybe for one reason is just the idea that it'd be easier for a command to a non-Jewish midwives to follow this command. If they were non-Jewish, or his expectation of them following the command would be less likely if they were Jewish midwives. If they were non-Jewish midwives, those would be the type he would approach, expecting the outcome he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason I think they're probably non-Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And just the tenor of the whole story, like in verse 19, the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women, so it's kind of like they're not part of the Hebrews,
Okay.
because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. So I make them I make this a type of Gentile women saving the Jews, which has been a lot of examples through history.
Yeah. Righteous Gentiles.
Righteous Gentiles, yeah. There's been a lot of those in history.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of examples in World War II.
Mm-hmm. Oscar Schindler.
Schindler's List. That was great.
Yeah.
Schindler's List. And a lot of people in the Scandinavian countries hid the Jews. And so I think this is an example. And I think this is also an example of what we might call the Gentile church, since the church is primarily ethnic Gentiles now during the tribulation. Here's the type of the Antichrist trying to wipe out the Jews. And the Antichrist will attempt to do that. And hopefully the church, the Gentile-based church, will come along. He'll maybe even use the church in a sense at first, because in his mind, the church is like the church all through history, which most that went under the name church in history killed the Jews, persecuted the Jews, anti-Semitic. So in his mind, I mean, people group the Christian church all together of all types, and the Roman Catholic Church being the dominant group within that. So in their minds, okay, the state has incorporated the use of the church in the past to kill the Jews, so we'll try to incorporate them again.
Now we're going to incorporate the medical world.
Yeah, and hopefully the Gentile church will, as in verse 17, because they fear God. Yeah. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So I just have this in my mind that the Antichrist is going to hope to use the institutional church against Israel, but the true church, which is really the church in God's mind, will actually help rescue the Jews.
In the way of like the midwives, they'll be the midwife, as it were, trying to scare the.
And in essence, if mine and your belief about the church being here during the tribulation, and the salvation of Israel at his return, and God working through us to help his people in the wilderness, in a sense, the church will be the midwife for the birth of Israel. I really see that during the tribulation. I see a lot of. I just see a lot of symbolic language here of the Great Tribulation leading to the return of Christ in this first chapter.
Then on the flip side, the Antichrist side, or the Pharaoh side, on that side of the ledger, you've got Bill Gates, Dr. Fauci. You've got so many components that are really will work against Israel. I mean, that's not even Hamas and the others. That's just out and out the changing of the West And so the convergence of anti-Semitism is going to run the table, spill over into our nation. And so that will basically join forces with Hamas and the others.
Yes.
And so we, all these components are spokes to the same hub on the Pharaoh side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to leave one entity standing. You're right. The scriptural churches will be the only midwives available.
And the reason they did it and the reason we will do it during the tribulation is because they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And there's, boy, this gets into some really great stuff about the tribulation, but what we know from our history of our Anabaptist forefathers who were willing to suffer and die in terrible ways is we don't always understand the peace they had in their suffering and death.
Right.
But there really is something about when the grace of God works in us to fear Him more than we fear humans. It's very liberating. It sets you free almost. It's the spirit of what we call the three Hebrew children. You look at those fiery furnaces and you're getting ready to be thrown into it, and yet you look at Nebuchadnezzar and say, we don't need to go pray and discuss it. We already know what the answer is.
Yeah.
And God's able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, but that's not our call.
Right.
But if He allows us to die in the fiery furnace, we're still going to be delivered from you.
Yeah.
And we're not going to bow down.
Yeah.
Now that is a liberating experience.
And
to be able to say that with no fear.
And that's the holding on during the wrestling match. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will not let go till you bless me.
That's right. That's right.
And so what we have here is we have an example. I know I keep tying all these things to the Great Tribulation. What we have here is civil disobedience. They defied the command of Pharaoh. And because I've been thinking about this whole subject a lot this last year, because the so-called Christian churches have been so divided over this COVID thing. I mean, how many sermons have been preached from Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, and passages like that, especially Romans 13 about obeying the laws of the land, obeying the human rulers and all that kind of thing. And many of the so-called churches saying, that means we should just go along with all the rules they tell us. I mean, the Bible teaches us to. And then others more like you and me saying, well, Peter did say to the leaders of their day, we ought to obey God rather than man.
Yeah.
And you start telling us we can't meet, we can't have church.
Yeah.
And because we do not hold to the invisible church, then we cannot equate Zoom meetings the same as gathering together in person.
Right. Plus in our Constitution it says we can.
And I told this to Liberty just last week. I believe Romans 13, and I believe that when we met online for several weeks last year, and then when we, as quickly as possible, even before probably it was acceptable, we met back in person. Yeah. And we've not stopped. And because we were following the law of the land. The law of the land is not some elected bureaucrat. The law of the land is the Constitution.
Yeah.
And we were keeping the law.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people took Romans 13 to say that if the governor or the president or some health official tells you you can't meet, then we ought to obey that. But if we really believe it goes against the Constitution and against the Bible,
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
beholden to that.
Right. Right.
We are to defy that kind of
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
anyway, these were practicing civil disobedience, and God blessed them.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think this is going to come back into play in the Great Tribulation.
Yeah.
We are going to have to rethink all of this and adjust our thinking to become more like these two women.
Mm-hmm.
That we're going to have to defy human government and obey our conscience and obey God, because we fear God more than we fear man. And we may have be arrested and put in jail and have our rights taken away because we're practicing civil disobedience. But this is such a great example of defying the power of the law of the land, because they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm. And then we know the root of it. You mentioned already, the whole thing the premise was deceit.
Yes.
So these rules, these changes, these restrictions, what's the root of it? It's deceit. They're grabbing onto power. A lot of them made a name for themselves, the governors and the mayors. And
so, we sometimes I listen to Dennis Prager, you know who he is.
Oh yeah.
And, I just really enjoy a lot of things he has to say. And he talks about, in the Jewish religion, they teach, sometimes it's okay to tell a moral lie, like to save a life.
Yeah.
You say, well, we should never lie.
Yeah.
These women lied, or stretched the truth at least, to save the life of babies.
Yeah.
And God blessed them for it.
Yeah.
God was pleased with them because of it.
They discerned the entire landscape. They weren't just focused on the one small segment of it, but they ascertained everything about it. And I believe God raised up those women who were in their position probably by God's selection.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great story of courage, of fearing God, of defying the powers of the world. And, in our case, in tribulation, we may be killed for it, but the end result is the same as with them.
Yeah.
The end result will be a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pharaoh said, that the way of a tyrant is if he can't accomplish his purpose through deceit, he does it through raw power.
Yeah.
So that's what he does in verse 22.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river. Every daughter you shall save alive. Just throw them into the river.
Yeah.
You have mass murder. And that's what, every atheistic, God-hating, Bible-hating government system, whether it be socialism or communism, all those isms, always goes down this path. Yeah. Mass murder.
Yeah. And if you can't win an election legitimately, you rig it.
Yes, exactly. It's not even funny because it's too true.
It's true.
But maybe I'll just close with this chapter by saying, when we jump ahead, so he wanted to kill the Jewish male babies in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So we jump ahead to the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
God turned the tables on him. You're going to kill my people in the water? I'm going to kill your people in the water.
Yeah.
And do you think those Israelites on the other side, looking back at the water coming on the Egyptians, do you think they thought back to this event? We remember when he tried to kill us with water. Now God kills him with water.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, amazing.
God has a way of turning the tables on people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that gets us through chapter 1, and we're going to pick up next week with Moses and get the confrontation with Pharaoh. But we're going to try to keep doing what we did with this chapter, is keep trying to tie it to both comings of Christ, principles that speak about Christ,
Uh-huh.
and speak about Christ's people.
Yeah.
And it was just, to me, a lot in this first chapter that was easy to do that, to jump forward, thousands of years, hundreds of years, and apply it to later things.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we look at the Bible through the lens of continuity, it's easy to connect all the events of both testaments.
Yes, it is.
Because it's one main thread. He's going to have a covenant people based on Genesis 3:15. He's going to hold to that promise. He's laying it all out there piece by piece, but he's going to have a people to stand in the end. And we're just looking at the segments along the way.
I ordered a chart today. I won't get it for a week or two, so when I get it, I'll try to show it to you. But you can look it up online. You can see pictures of it online. Just look up Bible hyperlinked Bible. And I was listening to a Jordan Peterson lecture recently, and he called the Bible the first hyperlinked book. And I really like that idea. And, like you read an article in Wikipedia and it has all the hyperlinked things you can click on.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things are like that now. But he called the Bible the first hyperlinked book.
Huh.
And you think about it. And so I ordered this chart. It's really interesting. It's just this, I'll have to show it to you, but it looks beautiful. And the bottom graph is like all of the chapters and books of the Bible from start to finish.
Mm.
Then it has these like different colors of arcs. So there's like, because the guy that did this claims that there are 6,300 hyperlinks in the Bible.
Wow.
And many of them are, you take like Genesis 3:15, there might be 50 hyperlinks to that scattered throughout the Bible, let's say. Yeah. Other things, there might just be 2 or 3, but certain things, there's going to be dozens, certainly. Yeah. And so each one of those, he does it arc further and further down toward Revelation.
Wow.
And so it's just this beautiful, it's like firework arcs, all the way through. And it claims to have 6,300 of those arcs. And he has it in beautiful color and everything. And it's just a really beautiful way of showing what Peterson said. The Bible is a hyperlinked book. Yeah. So when I get it, I'll show it to you.
Yeah.
And, but you can see, just go online and type that in, hyperlinked Bible, and it'll come right up.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote that down.
I think I'm going to, when I get it, I may take it to the church, and it may not be quite big enough in our building, but post it on the front of the pulpit or something, just keep it there, just to remind people that this is what, like, you and I constantly try to do, is to present the Bible in a hyperlinked way. Yeah. It's all connected to each other.
Yeah. You have anybody that's artistic in your church, you can take that, turn it into a 20-foot cloth chart.
I don't know. Or there might be a way to, I don't know if there might be a way to download or to make a copy of it and enlarge it. I'm not sure. Take it to a professional person, enlarge it or something. Yeah. But I think it's only just 8.5 by 11 size that'll come to me. I'm not sure.
Wow. Does it come with a magnifying glass?
But I like to look at the Bible that way, a hyperlinked book.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that fits our approach right there.
So you'll be putting both of our emails up, and we want to encourage our viewers to share our YouTube link with anyone you wish to. Yeah. We're up to 30 subscribers. So well on our way to infamy.
Well, we're just burning up the internet, aren't we?
But we enjoy it whether anyone else watches it or not. But we would like for more people. Not that we want people to look at it and say, oh, they know a lot about the Bible, or we enjoy it. But to just fall in love with the Bible. Fall in love with how the Bible is laid out, how it's all connected, and how it's all beautiful and all speaks about Christ. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do with this.
Yeah. But like you said before, if we just jumpstart them on that path, and they can, get the gist of it, that it is connected, and quit seeing it so chopped up in a dispensationalism type approach. It's one major theme. So,
well, I just looked at the clock. I got to get going here.
okay, all right.
Good talking to you, Mike.
Yes, good talking with you.
So we're on our way toward 40 now. We got number 31 in the pocket, and
In the pocket, yeah. I'll get these up on our channel, and we'll take it from there. So, thank you everyone for listening in, and we hope to see you next time.
thank you, Mike. See you later.
All right.